today's presenter, Mr. Ben Schmerler. He is DP Solutions Director of Strategic Operations. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thanks everybody for attending today. I think this is a really important topic, and it's an exhaustive one. So, Jill mentioned the questions earlier, so I always say ultimately these webinars are about you, the attendees, and getting information that you need. So while I probably in a short slide deck can't go through every aspect of bring your own device considerations, I want to make sure we get what you want to hear. So feel free to drop those questions in as I go, and we'll make sure to address things as best you can or offline after the fact. So as I mentioned, BYODs is a really important topic. I think it's kind of been overlooked a little bit in the past, and we'll talk a little bit more about all these considerations today. So just as an introduction, when you look at the technology trends in the industry, and as well as how we work and how we relate to technology, we're really being pushed towards bring your own device when it comes to how we work. Everyone is a lot more independent with what they do and how they do it. So one trend is cloud and software as a service, which generally allows more flexibility. If you're using some kind of, say Microsoft Azure cloud solution or a Citrix solution, or all your applications are hosted on their own websites where you log into your QuickBooks online or you log into your email online as opposed to connecting to a central server you keep in your office, that usually lends itself to bring your own device where you can use an iPhone, an Android, a Mac, a PC, whatever you like. The rise of smartphones to the point of ubiquity. So I remember back in, I want to say 2007, when I got my first, let me just check something real quick. My first iPhone, and when that happened, there was basically no one had actual iPhones and no one had smartphones. There were Blackberries that were sitting around that connected to email, but they seemed more like an afterthought. And eventually what happened, I want to say really when the iPhone started connecting to Microsoft Exchange systems and we were able to have synchronization between phones and calendars and contacts and emails and such, then everybody had to have them. And now if you walk around any office today, I would imagine that it's the little flip phones that don't exist anymore and the smartphones are everywhere. So it's expected now that smartphones are able to connect to everything. Whoops, I'm in a little trouble here. The end of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. The beauty/curse of a always connected world is that when we are expected to talk at any time, and all of our expectations have shifted. When we have a bad delivery from Amazon, our expectation is that we can go to Amazon's website, report it, chat with somebody that minute, and get a response. And that's almost been extended to our businesses. When our clients contact us, I know how it feels at DPS, where sometimes it feels like you have this pull to get back to a client, and it doesn't matter if it's necessarily if it's Friday at 8 o'clock or Monday morning in the middle of the night when we have a server outage. The expectation is that there's a bit more awareness that we're not under normal business hours anymore, which lends itself to giving people the flexibility to work where and how they want. And then the general trend of newer, faster, better, cheaper devices. We want new stuff all the time. I mean, speaking for myself, I know that I'm replacing my smartphones purely because of the new sexy phone, maybe every couple years or so. I think our patience with our devices has gotten a little shorter. Perhaps in a good way. I mean, these devices are getting much, much better. I think about my old iPhone or my iPhone 4 or something like that compared to my Samsung. I don't even have the state-of-the-art Samsung. I have a Galaxy 9 now, which is a fine phone, but how much these things progress and how much better these devices are. We constantly want new stuff, so the platforms we work on sort of have to support any device. And so that, again, lends itself to bring your own device in the workplace. So for our agenda today, I want to talk about a bunch of different things as it pertains to BYOD. So first, what devices do we need to include in our bring your own device plan? So what kinds of devices actually matter when we're developing a strategy? I don't know why that just happened. When should we not allow BYOD and consider company-owned devices instead? So the sort of advantages and disadvantages to bring your own device. So we're going to have a talk about the limitations here and when maybe we should say, we're just going to issue something from the company as opposed to purchase or allow our employees to use their own devices. What policies and procedures should we develop? So what are the kinds of rules and regulations that we should put in place that make sure that when people are using their own devices, that they're using them responsibly, so that A, our company's data is protected, B, that we're productive, that everything is done in a good fashion. What tools can we use to protect devices and the data on them? So the other side of all the policy stuff is there's actual security technology and management technology that we can use to protect our company data when they're on personal devices. And then, of course, manage the devices themselves, because unlike a more traditional Windows Server PC environment, these devices are much less centralized with a lot less sort of centralized support. So what can we do to manage them in this kind of world? Staff messaging and concerns. So I think a lot of times when we start implementing rules and regulations about how we touch individual people's devices, we're going to install this agent on your personal phone, or we're going to insist that you do this on your home PC. There's some concern and some paranoia for good reason about how we deal with this with our staff. So we're going to talk a little bit about culturally how we can deal with those sorts of things and make it a powerful but still positive message with the staff. What kinds of work should we restrict on BYOD? So there are going to be things that maybe we just don't want to allow on bring your own device. There are things that maybe we just shouldn't do or shouldn't allow, either for cost reasons or security reasons or management reasons or whatever. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I think we would be really remiss if we didn't talk about how the cloud in general can contribute to strong bring your own device management. So there's sort of a side benefit is as we use these cloud platforms, these software as a service platforms, we can do a lot more to control what happens with the device side as compared to maybe when we had to manage big server closets with assets that people connected to remotely. And of course, perhaps the most important part, and again, I think we already got maybe one question in, Q&A, where we're going to answer your questions and have an open forum, and that's an open-ended thing. We always encourage people to participate. So what devices should we be thinking about when we're talking about BYOD management? So a good BYOD management approach should consider not just what's out there now, but potential future needs. And the way we call this is, I call it the 5 W's, and this isn't going to really shock anyone. I pulled some of this from a Wired article, but I thought it was really useful for this, and we can share more details after the webinar if you like. So the first is who. Who actually needs to work in a BYOD environment? Who are the staff members that we want to have the flexibility to say, allow their home PC to connect, or their personal iPad or their iPhone or something? Who actually needs this in order to be productive? And this is an identity thing. We should keep a list of people on staff who have access to our assets remotely using their own devices. I just think that's good management. So what kinds of devices are we using? So is our staff entirely using iPhones? Chances are we're going to have a whole mix of devices. But again, it's important to know what kind of devices are connecting. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is it's going to impact our security and management perspective, but it also is going to impact the types of platforms we choose to work with and the services we use, and maybe potential software decisions we make in the future. Let's say you're looking for a new CRM or ERP tool, and you know that your staff is going to be using the run-of-the-mill of devices, just Windows PCs, you're going to make your decision about what kind of CRM or ERP you buy perhaps differently if everyone is perhaps using, they work in all 50 states and they use devices you may never touch. These are going to make serious implications, not just on your BYOD policy, but about other things you just determine, like your security approach, your software selection, et cetera. So we really need to know what devices people like to work with. When, the situation. So when are people actually using BYOD? So is it just that hey, when it snows, we're in Maryland, so, we have snow days now and again, and, when it snows, our staff is allowed to connect remotely to their email and our file server and let's say our electronic medical record system using this. That's the scenario when they do it. Other people, I would consider myself among these people. I could be using my device, whether it's my home PC, my Android smartphone, my Dell laptop here in the office, or any number of other devices. I could be using them anytime, anywhere. Last week I was in Chicago at a conference, and I was using my work laptop and my personal cell phone to connect and do some work while I was remote. It could be something else next week. So we need to understand the scenarios, the situations in which our people are going to use their own devices. Really important. Where? The location. So as I mentioned, for me, last week I was in Chicago. Sometimes it's going to be this person's a road warrior. They're traveling all the time. They need to have flexibility to connect from a variety of different internet connections at a variety of different locations. They're going to use their own cell phone connection, or they're going to use the Wi-Fi in the hotel or the conference room or conference center or whatever. We need to consider where people are actually going to work. This is going to have major implications on our decision-making process. And then why? So just because people want to connect doesn't mean they should be able to connect, right? If somebody just really wants to have email on their phone, but it's not really that productive, and it's going to create new security implications, management implications, costs for the organization, et cetera, maybe we just don't allow it. When people want to connect their devices or they want to work from home or whatever, we really need to have a good use case for this, because I think in the past, there was an implication, well, can we connect someone? We should connect someone. And that all sounds great in theory, except for the fact that what if by creating this thing that sounds like just clicking a couple buttons here creates now security issues for our organization or compliance issues for our organization? If we can't justify that return on investment of giving that person the access to use BYOD with our company data, we just shouldn't do it. So if we can't answer the why, then maybe we shouldn't allow that kind of connectivity. So to elaborate about, more specifically what devices we should be thinking about, I would certainly consider home PCs and laptops. One of the nice things about, for example, Office 365 is, they sort of, on many of their licensing models, allow people to install the Office suite on multiple devices, including home devices. I install the company's Microsoft Office suite on my home desktop, and I don't have to pay for it out of pocket because of the licensing thing. But of course, that means that now my home PC needs to be a part of our BYOD management plan. So we do need to think about the home PCs, laptops. Not just that, but there are implications here in terms of who might be hanging out, right? So, you're working from home, perhaps you're watching your kids or something like that. You're working from home on your home PC. And you might be dealing with sensitive data that you don't want your kids to mess with, or accidentally, spill apple juice on your laptop or whatever. I mean, we have to start considering the implications of working from home, almost from a physical perspective. What about if somebody steals your home PC and there's company data on that? How do we manage that risk? This all has to go into the BYOD policy and management plan. I call them kiosks. Basically, these on-demand computers. This looks like sort of like a hotel room business center. You could even see a little business center label on the door there. But it could be, something at an airport, or it could be that you're just working on a PC at your client's site, and they say, oh, you want to connect your things here? Jump on this laptop. I mean, that's a kiosk for all intents and purposes. I would consider kiosks devices that we really don't have much management control over. Essentially devices that we have an internet connection with and that can build connectivity to our company assets. So we have to consider, is that something that people are using, or should we forbid it? And the answer is going to be different based on the organization and what you're doing. There's also, of course, tablets and smartphones. And I think when people think about BYOD, these are the first things that come to mind. Most of the tools that are used to manage these products are very much the same, but how they may be used and defined in policy may differ. So A lot of people, when they have their smartphones, they use them to send emails or maybe do a quick calendar entry or a text message or something. But on an iPad, they may actually download Word documents and make edits to contracts and stuff like that because the platform, the tablet platform, is more conducive to that than others. Well, how does that impact our ability to bring your own device? How does that impact our thinking process about what we do to manage and secure those devices? So you might use the same tool to manage them both. You might use, for example, on Office 365, the Intune management on both devices. But how you think about how that's configured and deployed may differ based on whether it is a smartphone or a tablet. And a lot of that's based on the usage case. So when we define purpose, we can determine the tools and policies appropriately. So that's something I really wanted to talk about real quick. And I would essentially say it's going to be any device that is not something owned by the company, but that we feel is going to connect to company-owned data. I'm going to pivot a little bit, and we'll talk about the idea of company-owned versus personally owned and advantages and disadvantages. And so the big fundamental question is, should you even allow staff to use their own devices to do work? I think this is a very fundamental question, and I know for our clients, the answers vary quite a bit. And I don't come into this webinar having all of the answers about what you specifically should do. I could certainly give you advice, but there are no right or wrong answers here. I would say the more important part and the big message of all of this is what kind of culture do we want to create, and what works best for us, and what should we consider, what process should we put in place so that when we decide whether we issue company devices or allow personally owned devices, that it's based in some kind of logic and risk management profile. So there are some advantages, obviously, to giving people the ability to bring their own device. I think there's the obvious one, which is, and this is measured, there are studies that will look at this. Generally, when you give staff the flexibility to use their own devices and bring their own devices, there tend to be better employee satisfaction, increased engagement, and improved productivity. For better or worse, having that smartphone pop up that important email to you anytime, any day, will get more of a response, more engagement from staff. Now, obviously, we don't want people to burn out. We want people to be healthy, have healthy relationships with their smartphones, which is a whole other. I think we could probably have a whole subject about mental health and smartphone use, et cetera. But there's no doubt that giving people the ability to do this can lead to increased productivity and benefits. I know it makes me relax a little bit more that I know I'm not missing anything. It's sort of like a safety net for me. I can be kind of a paranoid guy when it comes to work. And so knowing that I have awareness wherever I am, that I don't have to worry about, I went to Chicago last week, I don't have to worry about what's happening back in the office, that I have that ability to communicate, that's really important to me. It can minimize capital expenses. I mean, if I'm issuing smartphones to people on my staff, these devices aren't cheap, especially when you get rid of the subsidies that are built into cellular phone plans. So also, if people are working from home on their home PCs, but they're using their own machine that they bought at Best Buy as opposed to something that you're buying from Dell for at least a few $100s along with other assets you put in, well, you may have saved yourself a little bit of money doing that in some respects. And so that's why I say it can minimize capital expenses. It's not a guarantee. But obviously, it's cheaper if an employee wants to use 4 different devices. If they're bringing all those devices and all you have to spend is some management products and policy, you could probably get the productivity without having to make the tech investments. Improves employee accessibility. So if we need to reach people and we have a good BYOD policy that people are bought into, there should be an expectation that we should be able to reach people more. I'm taking off next week. I'm taking a little time off for the Labor Day week. But I'll be accessible. I'll be reachable on my cell phone. I certainly don't want to spend a lot of time working, but I can be reachable, and I make that an expectation that if the house is on fire, that I certainly can help out. That said, there are some disadvantages here. I don't want to make it sound like this is all rose-colored glasses, that we should just automatically allow BYOD. We really have to have constant management and tracking. We cannot allow the BYOD policy to get out of control. that any device can come in, that any device can connect and access data from anywhere, anytime, that the rules are communicated to people but not enforced and stuff like that. We have to put solutions in place to act as safety nets for BYOD. If somebody quits the job, maybe they just retired or moved on to something better, we have to have something in place to lock that device out from connecting to company data. We should ideally have the ability to wipe company data from that device, just the company data. We're going to get a little bit more into that. But the point is that we have to have tools in place that have management and tracking, which is a cost ultimately and a management thing that we have to put in place. It requires effort and energy. For most people, most organizations, it's worth it. But I can't sit here and say, well, more management is an advantage. It's just something we have to do. It can certainly create new liabilities. So when you're allowing remote access into systems, now we have compliance that we have to consider. So one great example I can think of is PCI, the payment card industry. PCI compliance now calls for, if you are doing remote access into the cardholder environment, now that remote access must have multi-factor authentication put in. So now we have a compliance standard we have to meet, and if we fail to meet that compliance standard, we could suffer consequences. Obviously, if more people are connecting in more places, there are more potential locations for a breach. Now, again, this can be managed, but if we're not managing it carefully, we can create new liabilities. So we have to be aware of it. It can be managed, and it's probably worth it, but we should be cognizant of those new liabilities and costs that are in place. There may be other costs like bill stipends for service plans or overtime. I know it's very common that if someone's using their own personal smartphone to work, maybe they get a expense check from the company every so often. If people are using their BYOD stuff and they're working on Saturdays and Sundays and such, don't be surprised if that gets reflected in timesheets and stuff if you have hourly employees. So we have to be mindful of the HR personnel issues when it comes to overtime. Now, again, this may be very much worth it. You may find that this increased engagement, this increased effort, yeah, you'll pay the overtime on that stuff. But we can't sit here and pretend that these costs don't exist or that these aren't things we need to keep in mind. So I really want everybody to think about that, about this stuff. This is certainly not the only advantages, disadvantages, but these are the sort of things we need to weigh as we start allowing people and develop our own management approach to bring your own device. This kind of pivots into policies and procedures. So one thing I always like to say about security risk management is that there are two sides to this. One is the tools, which are tech, things we buy, products and services we utilize, but also we have to actually have some general rules and personnel behaviors and culture that help support our security and risk management goals, because not everything can be controlled with tech. We still need people to be engaged and have a positive culture and positive relationships when it comes with our technology. Because people, for example, no matter what I do, it's going to be hard if somebody wants to intentionally breach data to stop that. This is why we need the policies and procedures in place. So we need to have a data management and sharing policy if we don't already have one. So the first thing we need to consider is what kind of data we allow on personal devices and the rules for sharing. So, it goes without saying that if you don't have a sensitive data policy or a PII policy or some kind of policy that defines for your organization what data you care about, where it lives, how it's supposed to be used, we really need to create that. And we should extend that to things like data management and sharing. So now that we've defined what data that the firm cares about and where that data sits, and what generally we're allowed to share, we should extend that policy to speak to how it deals with bring your own device. So, for example, we are forbidding you from accessing company data at all until the device is registered to our mobile device management system. It is in our inventory that you've gotten authorization and sign off from managers, etc. And then we will allow you to access your email on your phone. Then we will allow you to download, if it's part of our policy, we'll allow you to download company documents onto this device to manipulate them. And you can do data sharing from your phone. You know, you're allowed to send off this sensitive data from your phone under these kinds of conditions. I'm not saying that these are your exact rules, but we need to have rules that make sense as it pertains to mobile device management, and we need to communicate those rules and get sign-off. These rules should be logical based on the nature of the data and our concerns and regarding breaches and sharing. Mobile device management policy. So when we deploy tools to set up security and configuration on mobile devices, we need users to accept the policy and sign off. We will fundamentally be making changes to the devices, and the user must accept in order to gain access on a personal device. So we can't just say the policy is you connect to the email and good luck to you, you know, you're fine. We should be communicating with people that once you sign up to connect to Office 365 email on your smartphone, we now have the right to force application updates. We now have the right to enforce a password policy. We now have the right to remove the email from the phone. We now have the right to force operating system updates to the device, so on and so forth. So it's not just having the tools in place that do this, but actual policy that says we are going to do this and that you're acknowledged that you're going to do this. And rather than block these things, you know, stopping, you know, maybe disconnecting it from the internet when we're about to do an update because you don't want that update to happen, or trying to override the policy, that you have bought into it and that you agree to this stuff. Because if the staff is not bought into the policy, if they are trying to work around it, if they don't believe in the policy or don't have agreement to the policy, they will find ways to work around it. And then also an incident management policy. So this is really something that should exist already within the organization. I think every company that cares about managing sensitive data and managing risk should have what you could call it incident management. Maybe this is included in your disaster recovery policy. But regardless, we should have processes and procedures that staff should be aware of that says, in general, that if you feel that you're a victim of a data breach or a security violation or what have you, that we are going to take the following steps to work with our IT department, with our management, so on and so forth, to report the incident and get response on this and deal with it appropriately. We should extend that again to bring your own device, in particular the mobile devices. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that someone's using their own personal smartphone to access company data, and then they're traveling. You know, it's me, Ben, and I'm traveling to Chicago, and I leave my phone on the airplane. I forget about it, and now that device is lost. Well, that is an incident that must be reported accordingly, and it doesn't mean we're punishing or we're running people through the coals, but it's important that people report these things and try not to hide them or you know, look at it through rose-colored lenses or something like that, because now this requires action on the company in order to get to manage the risks involved here. So we must have an incident management policy, incident response policy that speaks to the BYOD side. So tools we can use, and I'm going to speak specifically to mobile devices here because if you're talking about PCs, laptops, we're often going to be using the same tools we would use in an office, maybe extending it out a little bit. Excuse me. Mobile device management. So I've spoke about this in general. So mobile device management, as broadly defined, is a tool that allows IT support to take several dissimilar devices and set rules like password policy, remote wipes, screenshot rules, forced app installs, and so on. Basically, it allows governance over devices that generally require individual responsibility. Think about your iPhone or your Android phone. And every time that you go and you download an app or make a purchase or whatever, all of those purchases are generally being registered to an email address that's associated with someone's individual, a person, not the company. So on my smartphone, I have a personal Gmail account I use. When I install an app, that's going to Ben's personal Google Play account. It's not going to DP Solutions account. So this complicates matters for when it comes to management, because instead of having centrally managed licensing and control, now we have to use a tool like mobile device management to control many different individual devices and accounts. So you can see conceptually the management is a little bit different. this speaks to why good mobile device management tools are very important to mitigating risks. So if you don't already have some kind, you have a work staff that is really using their mobile devices, smartphones, tablets, whatever, in a major way, and you don't have mobile device management in place, I really think you should consider that, and we are here to help you on those sorts of things. One thing I want to mention, and this is something I hear all the time, is iOS devices, so Apple devices, do not utilize antivirus, but Androids do. So I don't want to get into the computer science of the matter, but if you have an Android phone or maybe even a Windows phone, I don't even know if those exist anymore, I don't see them too often, these platforms have commercial antivirus products that you can get on the App Store, and many of them are from the same trusted companies that you'd use for desktop and laptop antivirus. iOS devices work a little bit differently architecturally, but they have other tools to help manage security. And I think it's a little bit broad to get into right now in terms of all the tools, but this is again why I recommend using mobile device management, so that you could deploy the right tools to the right devices. So again, these devices are dissimilar. If we utilize mobile device management, we can deploy the right tools based on the right device. But I certainly think if you're using an Android smartphone, using some kind of basic antivirus, even one of the free tools, like I believe AVG has a free product that's ad supported, is not a terrible idea. Another thing I would like to mention is personal VPN. So we have to be careful here because not all personal VPNs are created equal. You may have read in the news several reports that some personal VPNs have been compromised. Some of them may actually be foreign-owned companies that we may not trust politically. I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but there are good personal VPNs out there that are trusted products that if we update and keep a real subscription on, can really hide the traffic that goes over the public internet when we're transmitting sensitive data between a personally owned device and a company-owned asset, perhaps a server in the cloud or server in-house or what have you. I would consider that, especially if you're doing a lot of remote work, a lot of travel work. It really can help with privacy. One thing I didn't include in this slide, but perhaps I should, and it's not so much a mobile device tool, but a general tool, is multi-factor authentication. If you've been on these calls before, I've preached about it over and over and over again. A lot of these hacks are looking to compromise the account, and password management is quickly becoming not enough. Having complicated passwords and password resets and stuff, it's really just a matter of time before a password is cracked. And once we start adding mobile devices and personal devices that connect to company assets, these are more vectors where traffic can be seen and perhaps accounts can be compromised. So I really recommend that if you have a sensitive account, maybe you're accessing an asset remotely, maybe it's just your Office 365, maybe it's your entire environment. I'm moving more towards the area that if you have something that you want to protect, period, we should consider multi-factor authentication, whereas in addition to a username and password, they get some kind of token, whether it's an app on their phone like Duo, which is a product I highly recommend, or a text message to their phone, or something. We should be utilizing multi-factor authentication wherever we can to keep the accounts and the data behind those accounts private. It just feels like on any account where there's a username and password, it is simply a matter of time before the password is cracked. So it's up to you to determine how important those accounts are, but if you're not already utilizing multi-factor authentication for your important accounts, you really need to get on this. I almost feel like a lot of people are behind the 8 ball on this. So that's kind of improvised off the cuff, but I did want to mention it. Staff messaging and concerns. So managing BYOD really does require trust on both ends. So if we want people to use their own devices and to buy into our tools and stuff, we need to really communicate appropriately as to why this matters, what we're doing, and so on. So management is not optional. Shame on us if we're allowing devices to connect to company data without regulation. We as managers are responsible for protecting the assets of the company. And if we're turning a blind eye to the security implications of personal devices and where our data flows, then we are not doing our job as managers. And so I think staff members who are reluctant to do this, or management that doesn't want to do this stuff, are really creating liabilities for the organization. I know here at DPS we are very much bought into the idea that the more we can do with mobile devices and personal devices to protect them, the better, within reason. Violations of policy will be treated very seriously. So again, there's only so much we can do with technology. If people decide on their own that they're going to share data that they're not supposed to, or use unapproved products, shadow IT, if you will, they should know that there are going to be consequences for this. They are custodians of our data, and breaches of data will have consequences, and for them personally if they're found negligent. So we should communicate that. I also think it's important to make it clear that the company has really no interest in the personal data on the device, right? Yes, we're forcing you to do a password rules. Yes, we're forcing updates. Yes, we're forcing this and that. But we have no interest in wiping family photos. We have no interest in looking at your text messages. These tools can't even do that stuff. It's the reason we're doing this is because we look to protect the company data. And so if you make the commitment to us as managers that you are willing to buy into our BYOD policy and manage this stuff accordingly, then we will respect your personal privacy and not go and violate, not that even we would even want to, but we're not going to look at that stuff. It's a two-way street. I'm going to pivot. I want to make sure we have room for questions. So BYOD restrictions, we should set some limits on what staff can do when utilizing BYOD. So I already talked about this a little bit, but we need a sensitive data policy or equivalent, just define the different kinds of data that staff will encounter on a day-to-day, as well as the rules surrounding it. And those rules should speak, again, to what can be done on a personal device. So here's the sensitive data policy as it pertains to the day-to-day work you do. And by the way, when you're working from home, when it's snowing, here are some restrictions regarding it. Simple stuff that makes sense, and we can help define that based on the technology in place. Part of that policy should speak directly to what kinds of sensitive data can be touched by mobile devices, period. So we might want to create some specific rules. You know, one thing I often say is things like sensitive HR files, personnel files. If we have a more traditional business where we have an office setting, you know, there's really no need to look at the tax records and we're out traveling. I don't think. If the work can wait and it's really sensitive and we can work on it in the office, maybe we create that rule. And it's not to say that we can't create secure ways of working on this stuff remotely, or more secure ways to work on this stuff remotely. But there's also prudence, where if something can wait, if something is not that important, maybe wait till we're in a company environment. It just makes sense. Devices not quote-unquote registered with the organization should not be allowed access to the organization's data. I think that goes without saying, and I think we touched on that in one of the previous slides. And this speaks to the incident management and reporting policy, which is that when a device is replaced, you know, let's say whether it's lost or otherwise, but let's say for the sake of argument, you know, I decided that I'm upgrading my phone today, I should be communicating that with the team. They should know that I got a new phone today and that I'm not using my Galaxy S9, I'm using my whatever phone now, and they should be aware of that. We should be communicating both ways on what's happening with these devices so that we have the time to plan and adjust accordingly. How the cloud can help BYOD policy. So one benefit of cloud environments is that data really often no longer lives in a server room. It's in, say, Microsoft Cloud or Amazon's cloud or some software as a service provider's cloud, which can have major implications for BYOD, and I think in many ways a positive one. And one of the other reasons why for many organizations we sort of lean them towards wanting to use the cloud more and more and get out of the in-house server business whenever it makes a lot of sense. So one big thing is it's often easier to limit users and devices on the SaaS side as opposed to the device side. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that I've got my file server and Active Directory in Microsoft Azure, and I use Salesforce software as a service, and I use QuickBooks in the cloud, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm using all these cloud-based applications. And then somebody quits suddenly, and we're worried that they're trying to steal our information. Well, good thing we're admins of all these accounts on the cloud side. We can go in and disable all their accounts. All of a sudden, the devices can't connect, and the data is protected. Much easier to do than if that same person is holding the data from a server in-house, where that data may sit on the device directly already, so on and so forth. You can often have a little bit more control over that user access. So that can be a real benefit of this cloud SaaS stuff. Oftentimes, just having the cloud removes the necessity to download information to the device locally in the first place. One great example I can use for this is Microsoft Teams, which was something we use more internally here at DPS. So Microsoft Teams, if you're not familiar, is I guess the next evolution of Skype for business. You know, it's a communications platform, chat, etc. This very webinar that I was preparing with Jill, we shared the data within Teams. We made edits within Teams. If I wanted to go into my Teams app on my phone and access the PowerPoint, I could edit it, but that data never had to get downloaded and saved on my phone. I could edit it within the application, within the cloud application. And so I didn't have to worry, well, did it get saved to the file server? What if, oh, I forgot my phone at home? Well, I just have to access Teams, and now I can access the file again. So that could be a real benefit and help your BYOD policy from both a security and productivity perspective. So consider stuff like that, because it can really help you out a lot. Mobile device management, MDM, can be implemented often as a part of cloud deployments. So one great example is Office 365 deployments. You've moved your email from in-house Exchange to Microsoft's Office 365 cloud. And now, as a result, we can make Intune deployment, which is MDM, a part of that deployment. Oh, now that you're connected, guess what? You're also getting the MDM. Now we're setting up the security rules on your phone, and we've now created an extra layer of security. And conveniently enough, we've done it as part of connecting your phone to our assets in the first place. So we sort of knock out two birds with one stone. So another real benefit for BYOD policy. Now, these benefits are going to vary based on what kind of cloud and stuff we're using, but oftentimes that can be a benefit. So we're at the Q&A portion. I wanted to make sure we left some time here. Thanks all for listening. I really encourage questions here. I am on the line as long as you guys need me. Again, I think we already have some questions, so I'm going to hand it back to Jill.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Actually, we're still waiting for some questions to come in, but while we wait, we do have a common question that we hear a lot regarding this issue. It's, are iPhones safer than Androids? It's one we get a lot, right, Ben?
Yeah. So this also gets down to very much fundamentally a lot of the same things that happened in the Windows versus Macintosh world on the PC laptop side. I don't really believe that iPhones are inherently more secure than Androids. There are some benefits. The sandboxing nature of the application environment is a benefit to the iPhone. Of course, that also limits what you can do on the iPhone in particular. Not only that, but Apple is very much into planned obsolescence and will stop supporting devices much sooner than the Android phones will. On the flip side, the Android phones often will have OS updates and patches that run through the carrier as opposed to Google themselves. But at the same time, you can sideload things, you can add more stuff. So I don't think one is inherently more safe than the other. I also think that a lot of these threats are not necessarily even on the device side, but on the account side, as I mentioned before. So even if you're using an extremely secure phone, no matter what platform it's on, if you're not securing, say, the Microsoft Office 365 portal or your portal into your Citrix environment or your Azure environment or whatever, you could find that it doesn't really matter how secure the device is. Now the account has been compromised, the user has been compromised. Phishing in social engineering doesn't care what device you're using. So I would say I would still stick with, as long as the device is supportable by the vendor and it's getting regular updates and management, then you could use whatever device you want for the most part. But it's important that you have a security strategy for it, that you maintain the device, and that ultimately we're focused on the broad ideas of security, which is the secure the device, you secure the individual, you have good policies and procedures in place, and you now, again, an increased focus on managing accounts and authentication procedures using multi-factor authentication.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Okay, one other question. What kinds of data should we be concerned about with our BYOD policy?
Great, yeah. So I would say that this is an extension, again, of the sensitive data policy. So I always start with the personally identifiable information, so PII, names, addresses, phone numbers, any kind of account or accounting information, all that is relevant. If you're in a professional service like healthcare, obviously that's going to extend to medical records or case files if you're an attorney, financial records if you're in any kind of financial services. I would include that. You would also consider, say, trade secrets or private, just privacy information. There are things that you just don't want other people to know, right? And no one's going to find you if that stuff comes around, but you have to consider that as well. It really should mimic what's in the sensitive data policy, and the way you manage it should really be in line with the liabilities associated with the data. So you're going to create different rules and different procedures based on the impact of a loss or breach of the data in question. It's hard for me, as somebody who's a technology manager, to know the value of data. This is a business discussion as opposed to a technology discussion. Only the business knows why the data is important and what the implications are. Certainly some of this is defined in like regulation and fines and such. If you have a breach of a medical record, you are subject to these consequences. But from a business perspective, it's usually the management that knows, well, this is what would happen if we lost all of our personnel files, or this is what would happen if we lost all of our case files or our financial records or something like that. Based on that impact, we need to determine what kind of investment we're willing to make in policy, tools, et cetera, to manage that data. And again, it all extends to the mobile devices, the bring your own device policy.
Okay, great. And then this is a very common question that we get a lot. What if my employees don't want mobile device management on their personal devices?
Then they can't connect their devices. So I make it a very simple rule. This is what we do. This is how we do it. If you don't want to do that, then you can't access our data. Period. And if you could give in to your staff member and say, you know what, you're a pain in the butt. I'm going to allow you to do this, and I'm going to break the rules for you. But that's you making yourself liable for the behaviors and actions of another individual. And I know how I feel about that, which is that I feel best when I'm in control of my own destiny and my own liabilities. If I was owning a business and a staff member said, well, I don't want to follow your rules, but let me touch all your sensitive stuff, I wouldn't like it. I mean, would you let somebody, let's say you had in your home, you had fine china that you have been going, from generation to these heirlooms from generation to generation, and then their kid wanted to toss the baseball around in the china cabinet, then you wouldn't allow that, right? So, I mean, it's the same thing with your data. You shouldn't allow people to be blasé or irresponsible with something that belongs to you. And so if people aren't willing to accept our policies, accept our management of their devices, then frankly, I don't want them having access to that stuff. And it's too bad. And it's something, as a personnel issue, that we'll have to work out. So.
Okay, great. All right, one more question. Can there be restrictions made on the employee personal device that restricts specific actions, like a screenshot?
Yes. So this is going to, again, be dependent on the device and the application and such. But I believe, and I'd have to dig in a little bit more technically, But I think you can even set it up that certain things cannot be screenshot, period. So like on my phone, and again, this is where it varies based on phone to phone, but when I press, I think the power button and the up volume button, if I recall correctly, excuse me, I don't do screenshots very often on my phone. By default, it takes a picture of what's on screen. Now, when I am in my web browser doing this, and let's say I'm looking at a news article on the New York Times, it'll take that screenshot. It doesn't care. If I am in an application that is subject to the BYOD policy, my phone will pop up an alert and it'll say screenshot forbidden due to management policy or something. I forget the exact word, something to that extent. And so that's a rule you can set up, and it's very useful. Now, there are limitations to this. It may not apply so evenly and easily to everyone, but yes, there are things. And I would expect, when you look at mobile device management as a whole, the mobile device management space, is really only, 10 years maybe? Because iPhones only really started connecting to corporate exchange in 2009. Then people started developing these tools a little bit more, and then they moved down from enterprise level down to the SMB level, which is always a process that happens in technology, I find. And now the products are sort of affordable, usable in pretty much all spaces. As those products exist, they move down the chain. They also get more feature-rich, more connectivity. So I would expect the amount of things you can do with mobile device management to continue to increase and get better for most organizations and helping to minimize issues.
Excellent. We don't have any more questions at this time, so if you want to go ahead and we can wrap up.
Yes. So thanks everybody for joining. My contact information is here. You can just send me an email if you like. We do these webinars every month, so we encourage you all to attend in the future. If there's anything you want to hear about in the future, let us know. We're always looking for ideas for things to share with you guys. We're going to be doing some follow-ups on this, and as always, thank you so much, and I look forward to doing it again a month from now.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.